I'll have the coordinator call the roll.
Mr. Dixon, Mr. Rollins,
Here.
Mr. Scrivano,
Here.
Mrs. McCulloch, Mr. Siegel,
Here.
Mr. Connor,
Here.
Ms. Stanford. With 6 present, 1 absent, we have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd like to at this time thank Connor, who's working in the back behind the scenes to produce our board broadcast on Channel 20. Thank you, Connor. And I want to remind everyone to please hold your questions until after the presentations. First thing on our agenda tonight is the meeting minutes of September 1st, 2020. Are there any changes, corrections, or additions to those minutes? Seeing none, I'll just ask us if we have a consensus to approve those minutes. Okay, so those will stand as approved, as written. Tonight is an exciting night. We get to start our new format of new standing committees. And so who better to kick that off, okay, than our Performance and Monitoring Committee, which is headed up by Mrs. McCulloch, and her liaison is Mrs. Detman. So, Mrs. McCulloch.
Right. Guys, look at the slide deck. Presenting the slide deck. I'm just going to give you a summary of this.
Okay.
You comfortable with that, or do you guys want to go through the slide deck?
I'm going to pull it up just to review it.
I'll give you the summary, and then if we want to, I've already asked Michelle if she'd pop through it for us. Start with this. Summary. So this is on process improvements made in the finance department. Well, Ms. Yar and Ms. Murray will answer any questions. Is Jamie here? They answered lots of questions from me. I think that I would refer anything to them moving forward, obviously. Improvements include streamlining processes through software, such as using the Follett Resource Manager to better manage our inventory. DocuSign to streamline contact approval processes, and implementing some new modules with Business Plus for accounts receivables. Major project involved using Basecamp as a repository for all of the budgeting work. A great deal of time and help multiple departments efficiently collaborate. Slide deck, some other key developments include mitigating the overpayment of TRS, eliminating student fees, reporting our financial priorities to the state through the ESSA reporting. Our conversation that we talked about with process improvement had to do with the whole budgeting process, too. And with the principals to get them on board to develop their budgets. That's kind of the high-end overview, but if any more, please.
Okay, any questions, comments, or feedback? Mrs. Stanford.
I have a question on the overpayment of the TRS contributions. Time, could you? In there?
Yeah, part of that was before my time too, but
Okay.
we recognized that, well, when I first came, there was an overpayment. You know, I was noticing, like, why are we having this overpayment about 4 years ago? And so I'm like, there must be something set up wrong. Like, there's got to be something there's got to be something, root cause of this. So we were getting a check back from TRS in November, so it wasn't a huge concern but it was a concern for me. So Danielle Oliveira, who I refer to as our data queen, she can work some data. So she keeps digging in. We really have a department of process improvement. That's our culture now. It's been really great. But she really takes every single error and she takes it on to figure out the root cause. So she did that. So we had some problems going on in Business Plus, but kind of behind the scenes, that just wasn't calculating correctly. So she was able to, over time, keep tweaking it to now that we have hardly an overpayment. I mean, it's really nothing. So it was really a great process improvement example.
Okay. Mr. Rollins?
I'm just curious, this discussion has triggered something for me. A long time ago, like 7, 8 years ago, we had people who were doing these process improvement. They'd take a set of systems in the district and do a process improvement like a Six Sigma analysis. And I just realized going through this, I haven't really heard anything about that recently. Do we still have that sort of focused group of people who are doing that? Are we not doing it? These process improvement, are they more being driven by the departments themselves?
Well, I mean, that's what you hope to accomplish when you do have a team. We don't currently have a team working on that, but the hope is that you develop a culture internally of doing this automatically. So we have done that. I mean, I've had experience in process improvement in my past other gigs that I've had. So it's just and when you find errors, I mean, you don't want it to continue, so you just keep on trying to make things better. So whenever there's a pain point, we look at how could this be different? How can we get other people on board, and how can we make this better for everyone? So we look at, it that way. So we listen to feedback, and we notice if we get an overpayment or notice, if we get it, like you forgot to submit something, we're getting, basically, finance is the last person in the process to recognize items that have gone wrong.
In addition to that, Mr. Zediker could probably speak to some of the work that Sarah Kerpius and her team are doing. A lot of it has been heavily focused on process improvements as it pertains to some of our administrative assistants, and specifically as it pertains to the registration process. There's been a heavy focus on improving in that area under Sarah's leadership.
Yeah, so we do have a small process improvement team still, but as Dr. Jarrett alluded to, over the last probably 2.5 years, those processes have been focused on clerical and data entry. About 2 to 3 years ago, we really realized that our data, what we were putting into our system wasn't accurate. So what we were getting to the state, both from an academic standpoint, attendance, other things that impacted funding, wasn't accurate. And so that team really took on the process with our clericals at the building, which then kind of parlayed into our registration process. So the last couple of years, it's been heavily focused on clerical registration to make sure that the data into our system is accurate. But they still also do support Dr. Vosberg with our culture and climate survey, so process within the building that shows up on the scorecard as well. And as soon as we continue and finalize some of the clerical improvements and we feel comfortable turning that back over, then they can start taking on some more department processes as they're only a team of 4.
Okay, thanks.
I had a couple, if no one else. I did, maybe I missed it, but the vendor, I'm sorry, it wasn't that one. It was the one that was abandoned. I gotta find it.
Yeah.
The utilizing the purchase order feature in schools.
Yep, so we ran a pilot. We tried to do a pilot on this for a couple years, and it does not work.
Doesn't work, okay.
It doesn't work.
That's a good reason to abandon it then.
So I wanted to let you guys know that I had it on my list of things to do, but we decided that this is really not going to work. It's really a software issue.
Okay.
They cannot do it. They really can't do it.
Okay.
So we decided to abandon that project.
This is a comment. The DocuSign, I'd probably use that more than any board member, I think, right now. Maybe Ms. McCulloch, but it works great for me. Laura sends it to me. She sent me one today and saves me a trip driving in to sign signatures. I can do it online, draw my name, works perfect. So. Yeah, okay. So, when this pandemic's over, maybe I'll come in more often. So,
Yeah,
but it's really easy to use, and you immediately, once the document is completely signed, you get feedback that says it's complete, and you can review it if you want or whatever. So it's usually building permits or contracts, stuff like that, but that I have to sign off on. So, but I use it every week, I believe, so.
Yeah, we were in a good position. I mean, there's just certain decisions that we made to move forward with really streamlining. That was an example of the DocuSign. So certain things that we moved to the cloud that we just decided to do electronically really paid off during the pandemic because we were able to, we already had that in place. It wasn't something that we did because of the pandemic. We already had that in place to try to streamline our process.
Good. Mr. Connor.
Yeah, as long as we're talking about that project, the In Touch, is the software abandoned or the whole project? So are we going to look for more software?
No. I was trying to expand the In Touch So I was expanding it to use that for purchase orders. So I want to do it, right now they use a school half sheet purchase order. So it doesn't mirror what we do in Business Plus. So I was trying to make it mirror what we do in Business Plus instead of using this half sheet school purchase order. But the software has not been able to make that work. Maybe we can revisit it if they upgrade some things, but
So there's no plug-in, there's no other kind of option on that?
not yet. It's been, that software has been fairly messy. So we've worked with the vendor. I've been here now 4 years, about, over 3 years to get things. I mean, it's a good software. It does we do great internal controls, but it doesn't do purchase orders as
Yeah,
well.
so the question would be, is there an alternative, and it doesn't sound like it?
The alternative that I would like to do, and that we were going to have to work on and review, is just to do it through Business Plus. We already have the workflows in there. Our Fund 99, this is really the school activity accounts.
Right.
So it's really the Fund 99 money. That is changing also, the way that we handle that with governmental accounting standards. So that is also changing. So this will be a good year to look at that as that changes as well, because it may not really be necessary. So Mrs. Murray and I, is there anything you'd like to add, Mrs. Murray, about that? Okay. All right, yeah, there's some things that are fluid right now, but we've tried, but if we're going to spend more time than it's really worth, then we just
Okay, thanks.
let that go.
Okay. Ms. McCulloch, anything else from your committee report?
Us?
Okay.
So consent agenda items, we have 9F, Cisco SmartNet renewal. Overall goal of this service is to maintain the 3,000 plus switches in the district, including escalated Cisco support. 4-hour response time for equipment replacement. Also includes security fixes and patches. 9G, recurring contract for ELS endorsement. That. Well, this contract's to continue to incentivize teacher acquisition of ESL bilingual endorsements to enable equitable ability for our English learners. Item number 9H is Power School Special Ed. The overall goal there was to ensure compliance with the rules and procedures, maintaining and developing student records for both more than 4,000 students identified as having disabilities, an IEP, as well as students suspected of having.
Sorry to interrupt, but Jude, you're either going to have to get closer or something. You keep cutting out.
Okay.
You're like
Okay.
way back, and you keep cutting out.
Okay.
Thank you. That's helpful. I'm sorry. I apologize. Want me to repeat any of those?
These will be for the October board meetings, right?
Will indeed.
Yeah.
Oh, so 9F, G, and H are the consent agenda items that'll be coming forward, passed through with explanations to our committee.
Okay, thank you. All right, our second standing committee is the Planning and Development Committee, and Mr. Rollins and Mrs. Yarrigan present that.
Thank you. We actually have quite a bit tonight, all of which are important. So the first item on the agenda is the budget calendar. And if you can pull that up on your screens, the proposed calendars here, it uses the approach that we've used in the past few years, a couple of years, of bringing pieces of the budget to us, and we're under here as the committee of the whole, at various stages. Like, for instance, review budget calendar and budget development update is on the calendar for November 3rd. If you look down, preliminary budget presentations for certain departments, there's one on March 2nd. But the thing that I really want to focus on is what the administration is asking us to do is alter our board policy, not just for 1 year, but actually change board policy as far as when the budget has to be finalized. So our fiscal year is July 1st to June 30th. State law does not require us to adopt a budget until the fall. But at some point in the past, and this predates me, and I think predates me by quite a bit, the board adopted a policy that the budget had to be finalized prior to the beginning of the fiscal year. And there's a certain common sense to that. You want your budget finalized before you start your fiscal year, right? We agreed to override that for this past year because of everything that was going on with COVID. And Ms. Yar actually has concluded that that's a better approach anyway. The proposal would be to do what we did this past year. So we would adopt a resolution before the beginning of the fiscal year authorizing expenditures of up to 25% of the budget, which then gives the administration the ability, once the fiscal year starts, to actually start obligating dollars, but not to have a final budget done until the end of September, which I think is right before the statutory deadline. So having, called that out, that's what we're proposing here, the administration's proposing, I'm just going to really open it up for the rest of the board to ask any questions or express any concerns that they have or comment.
Mr. Siegel.
This was explained to me once, and I think the explanation kind of went through my head.
Your mic.
There you go. Sorry.
Okay.
So roughly 3/4 of our budget annually is immediately consumed by obligating it to salaries and benefits. And we vote to release 25% of the budget to be spent on other things, which pretty well releases the district to spend the full 100% if my math works out. And because we're going to pay people anyway, correct? And we're going to give them benefits. That's roughly 3/4 of our budget, roughly.
This will be for just the 3 months, so we wouldn't pay everyone their entire salary.
Oh, I understand, but we're going to expect to pay it, and there'd be no reason to believe that we wouldn't. But then just releasing or giving permission to spend up to 25%, I'm assuming that doesn't include the wages and benefits. That's going to be, we can start fulfilling purchase orders and things like that. Is that correct?
Well, it would be, we pay wages and benefits out of that too, so the tentative budget lets us spend money before the budget is passed.
Oh, okay.
That's traditionally how schools are doing it.
So we're not talking about getting to spend the other 25%
No.
of the budget. We're just doing a block of time.
Yes,
Right.
yes.
All right, that's what I missed. Thank you.
Mr. Scrivano, if I could just interject on top of that, I think what this is really about the unreliability of revenue more than it is about needing more time to decide what we are going to invest in. So this year was very, very, it really illustrated what can happen in an extreme circumstance with COVID, but it is very, very typical in the state of Illinois for us to be asked, I would say in my 10 years in the district, it's rare in those 10 years that we know what the revenue assumptions are. We had a nice run with evidence-based funding for 3 consecutive years where we did know approximately what the state funding would be, but there were many, many years prior to that where we would be going into August, September before we knew what was projected. And so I do think more than expenditures, this really protects us against the imbalance of revenue. And then Michelle would over and over again, or whoever the CFO was prior to her, have to make significant adjustments anyways with some type of a budget amendment.
I mean, I've been pretty close. But that's the point that I've been pretty close. So, but it is the revenue. We do know the revenue from the state at this point. So the state revenue, we know what evidence-based funding is. We know what it is. We don't know what it is in June. It's our projections. Again, we've been pretty close, but still we could be off, and then we have to do a budget amendment. When I've been conservatively off, so then I would take a budget amendment back so we could spend the extra $1 million or so. CPPRT the estimate is given to us in August, or no, yeah, that's given to us. It's usually available in August, July to August. So again, we're guessing at that. That's really hard to guess at right now. Even the state was off on their projections on that. So our last year's revenue was off by $1 million because they trued it up after they got the tax returns in, and then they said, okay, we're going to short you your last payment by $1 million because our estimates were off, and that's what could happen. So if we could get their estimates and build it into the budget, so we can make those adjustments, it will probably prevent us from doing. Well, at least reduce the need for doing a budget amendment. I don't know if it'll prevent it completely, but it'll definitely reduce that need. The TRS on behalf numbers, those aren't available until after June 30th also. So that's in and an out, but it does make our financial statements look a little bit strange if we're off on that projection. And that's what we get from the state. So that is just cleaner when we end up having the CAFR. Our on behalf will line up more to what our actuals are because we'll have that number. We also know vacancies at the beginning of the fiscal year, or at the beginning of the school year, that we don't know in the beginning of the fiscal year because school hasn't started yet.
Mr. Connor?
Is the 25% sort of categorical, or is that just 25% of the bottom line number?
Latter.
In other words, is it
25% of the latter? Yeah, of the budget.
It's the total.
Yeah.
It's the total, yeah.
Okay.
All right, Mrs. McCullough, did you have a question, or was that? No. Okay.
No, I was just looking at the policy change.
Okay.
I wasn't sure. Is that coming forward then next week?
Yeah, so this is going to be an action item at the next board meeting on October 13th.
Well, the main change is that it'll be on or before the second board meeting in September.
Okay, Mr. Rollins?
Okay, so the next item on my committee's report is the functional building analysis. Again, because the terms can be confusing, this has nothing to do with the physical condition of the facilities. This has to do with really capacity issues and which buildings are under capacity, which buildings are over capacity or approaching capacity. And we have, I'm guessing he's joining us by Zoom. Okay, we have joining us by Zoom Rob Schwartz from RSP, which is the consultant that the district hired to do this analysis.
Good evening, Rob Schwartz here. We always were getting confused. You're RPS and we're RSP, so kind of interesting with the acronyms. Again, Rob Schwartz, RSP, owner of the company. We've been doing work in your district for 5+ years.
Okay. Can you speak up a little bit, sir?
Will do.
Maybe we'll try to turn the volume up here.
Yeah, let me see if I can move my microphone closer. Again, Rob Schwartz, RSP. We've been doing work in Rockford for the last 5 years with enrollments, demographics, boundaries, and this most latest edition is with the capacity, so the functional utilization. This presentation that I have is broken out where there's some background information, so some things about your enrollments, what it was in the past, what cohort changes are there, what we projected for your future enrollments pre-COVID. There's things that going into this next cycle that we can focus on the choices that students made and what is that impact in your enrollments. Is my volume a little bit better for you? Not hearing anything, so I'll proceed. So as we get to the building utilization, the district realized as we were looking at how full buildings were or what wasn't being utilized, that we needed to have something.
Sir, now we have your volume way too loud, so.
That we can lower it, right? I'll slow down maybe a little bit. So when we got to the building utilization, administration realized that we needed to have a apple-to-apple comparison with each of the buildings at each level, whether it was elementary, K-8, the middle school, or high school. So here's some reasons why we would do this type of utilization. I won't focus on that. I really want to help you understand some of the definitions, some of the things that went into the methodology to get this analysis. I'm going to focus on the bottom bullet point, which is functional capacity. And what RSP has done for each of your buildings is we focused on the program types, the requirements for those programs, what the building schedule, class utilization would be for those particular components, specifically for the middle school and high school. There were class size ranges that we would have a desired class size, and then what the standard class size is. There's a difference between your bilingual and monolingual strands when we focus on the elementary level. Looking at the different staff levels that would be appropriate for the buildings, as well as examining the square footage as compared to some adopted standards. And then when we go through our analysis, are there any places where we can repurpose space and use it as core classroom space? So if we focus on just classrooms, we have core classrooms. If we think of this at the elementary level, this would be the homeroom. So when you assign a student, the room that they actually go to for most of the day. We then break out by elective non-core classrooms. So think about that like arts, computer, music, those type of elements. Then we have other program space classrooms. These are spaces that are needed for different intervention to complete or enrich that student experience that they receive in each building. And then we have the repurposed classrooms. So if we're not going to use it as other program space or elective non-core space, because let's say there's a jump in enrollment and we need another strand to be assigned for that grade, can we do that? Is that a possibility in that building? So that's a brief rundown of classroom definitions. We did have to factor in the great program that you have with the bilingual strands and where they're assigned in each building and how that changed what the average class size is for those particular strands in that building. This table helps illustrate that. We had a process, lots of data that we collected. So we had district building floor plans, we had district master schedules, and then we looked at the district class size guidelines, but we also factored in what the certified staff contract is with the district. We did various interviews, physical on the grounds with 4 of our staff, where we looked at each of the buildings and identified, verified what it was on those floor plans. We identified some of the challenges, limitations of that programming, and then we went through a verification process. As we were in the midst of the verification process, COVID hit. And so everything at the district had to focus on different things. This is really where I want to call out Michael and Ian. They were great to work with, asked lots of questions, worked through an immense amount of data to provide the ultimate recommendations for functional capacity that RSP provided. Here's just some general tour observations. Again, there's more complete reports on all of this that go into specifics with each of the buildings. This is just an overview. Some of the data that becomes really interesting about your district, if we look at this from the 100,000 foot perspective, this table shows you the total functional capacity of the district. You could serve a little over 29,000 students. You see the breakdown of the enrollment on this particular table or graphic, pink being elementary, blue being middle school, orange being K-8, and then green being high school. When we look at those district-wide classrooms, you can see the breakdown at each of these levels. For the most part, the bulk of the classrooms are core classrooms. That should not be too much of a surprise. We then have what that percentage is with the elective classrooms and other classrooms. All of these spaces are required, they're needed in order for effective learning to take place in each of the buildings. You can't do it all without each of these happening in these buildings. The next few slides give you a breakdown, whether in this case it's the early childhood, special education buildings that we looked at. What we're focusing on is that capacity that we see with my cursor up here, is that dotted line, are we under that with enrollment district-wide? We looked at this from the elementary perspective. You can see we have a little over 12,600 functional capacity elementary-wide, and you can see that our enrollment has been declining and is forecasted to decline through 24-25. However, we noted there were individual buildings where there were challenges, Brookview and Riverdale. We looked at the K-8 capacity, or almost 1,700 functional capacity for those two buildings, and we have about a 1,200 to 1,300 enrollments. So again, adequate space district-wide as well as each of those buildings. So I'm looking at the right, I can see there's a little delay in when my slides come up. To go on to the middle school, we have about 6,800 capacity, and district-wide for the enrollments, we have about 5,500 students with a declining enrollment of about 5,200 middle school students to be served. Again, district-wide, adequate capacity, but we definitely have some challenges at RESA Middle School. We look at the high school, we have almost 8,000 functional capacity, and you can see the enrollment, it oscillates quite a bit as we see different changes with what's happening in the enrollments and how that's forecasted as we move forward. We have adequate capacity, but I would suggest to you very tight in some of these buildings where we're over 95% capacity. RSP recommends that capacity to be between 85% and 95%. Again, this page gives you some of the general findings as we break it down by each of those levels. We have some different recommendations. The point that I want to focus on is that fourth bullet point about potential solutions to balance utilization. So I've mentioned some underutilization. There's also overutilization. So there's things that we can do that might be adding physical space, maybe relocating some of the educational programs, maybe thinking about things differently. Maybe there's paired schools. So having two elementary buildings share an attendance area, but only serve certain grades. We could do a realignment of boundaries. We can do enrollment capping. Some of that has already been happening. I think in your district, it's called weighted. We've been seeing that happen in Riverdale, and there's been some very interesting discussions on that with the admin team. We also could consider some different alternate schedules that increase the utilization, or we could identify and integrate different repurposed spaces into what the core educational need is. So that kind of is, in summary, a huge amount of work that's been done by RSP and your staff. I open it up to questions, comments that the board and persons here want to provide or ask of my team.
Okay, try it now.
We're good now.
Cool. So all the high schools it shows as really being close to that 95% mark, and the trend seems to be actually at what we're at for high school, if not even a little bit more. So what is the conclusion analytically of that space specifically for high schools?
Outstanding question. So what can you do with the 95% or greater high school utilization? I think the first thing is to look at how instructionally things are happening, and can we tweak out additional capacity? The other might be that you look for strategic additions to some of that space. I don't think your enrollment is changing enough unless you're going to change the size of what the high schools are, that you would build an additional high school. That gets into budgets, bonding, and so on. But I know with COVID, a lot of the conversations are, how can we get students in the building where they safely meet the COVID standards? So some of that's going to be driven by the physical space, but also some of the programming options that can be discussed with your admin team.
Yeah, I assume we're having follow-up on all of this. My second question is really more of a, I don't know, less analysis and more kind of result side. Is clearly there's the biggest gap is at middle school, and that looks to continue. So that's kind of interesting. It obviously means that people are going elsewhere and coming back for high school. That's what the numbers seem to say. So you wouldn't have to have your comments tonight, but I'd be interested in sort of the administration's view on that one. You know, what the thoughts are on the reasoning behind it and what we might be able to do about it, if anything.
My comment, Mr. Connor, would be is we've looked into part of the problem with middle school is that it's an uneven distribution. So we have a lot of excess space at Kennedy Middle School and West Middle School, and we have a lot of, and we're very close to or exceeding capacity at schools like RESA. So obviously in COVID, we're taking a pause from all of this with buildings that are operating at about 50% capacity max. But moving forward, I think we are going to have conversations. We can certainly look at the what the rate of people leaving or coming back for high school to middle school, but we also have kind of a balance issue with some buildings being very crowded and some having some excess capacity, and that capacity not being evenly distributed where the need is.
And I totally understand that point, and it certainly ties out to the numbers here, but I think the question in my mind, the obvious one, is why. I mean, I would think that to some extent or another, we'd at least like to know, you know, if people leave and for what reasons. If you look at our decrease in student population, I mean, it was really all centered in middle school. So, I mean, it might be worthwhile for, you know, some group to either have, you know, focus groups or something, some method of getting feedback from families on what's going on. I mean, I think this is one. I mean, the two follow-ups that I see here is, you know, number one is, you know, is there anything educationally, as was suggested on the high school level and at the middle school level, kind of similar with the opposite problem is, you know, people leave for a reason, and I think that's the part that, at least for me, I'd like to see at least some follow-up on that.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, thank you very much.
I actually had.
Mr. Rollins does.
I'm not actually sure that the difference in capacity between middle school and high school shows that people are leaving and coming back. There's a little bit of a difference, but we just have more middle schools. So if you look at the total N number, like just for this, well, I guess it'd be last year, 2019 to 2020, 5,475 students in middle school. There's 3 grades in middle school. That's 1,825 students per grade. And in high school for the same year, if you divide that by 4, it's 1,929. So it's a difference of about 100 kids, which is a difference. So there's a total difference of 300 between the classes, but you know, it's not a huge difference. I guess I shouldn't even say this, but you know, what immediately jumped to mind was the way to solve this problem is to turn West back into a high school.
Oh, man.
Probably shouldn't have said that out loud. So the, yeah, yes. So the actual question that I've got for the consultant is, you know, our focus has been on, and we've tried to tell the administration to focus on improving our graduation rate in the high schools, which would reduce the number of people dropping out. And you do have a slide in here somewhere where you show the decrease in the size of the classes from 9th grade to 12th grade. Do you run any sort of analysis to see what would happen to the building capacities if we actually improved our graduation rate?
Great question. In the slide that I have that should be available for you to see right now, you can see exactly what you just mentioned. A huge increase from 8th to 9th grade, but then we lose students going forward. So that would be what I call leakage. Some of that is natural, where people move out of the district. Some of it could be they're choosing other educational opportunities. Some of it might be they're just no longer in school. So yes, we can look at if we do, if we're able to have a better retainment of those students, we absolutely would need more high school space. Because when you look at the decline just on those last 2 rows of a 3-year average and a 3-year weighted average, again, this doesn't have this year's data in it, but you can see that we lose about 1,300 kids from 9th grade to 12th grade, which offsets the increase that we historically see from 8th to 9th grade. So if we did keep those kids, our conversation would be very different. It would be, we absolutely need more high school space, and a lot of it.
If I could just interject, this is going to be a perfect segue eventually into our very next topic, which is about the freshmen, as we look at our freshman academy and our freshmen on track. What ends up happening is the way the state classifies 9th grade status changed, and it looks like 2013, 2014. And what ends up happening there is when you have a freshman on track challenge like we do, we're sitting in the low 60s, those freshmen essentially get counted. There are about 500 freshmen that get counted as freshmen again. And so those aren't extra kids. Those are, in fact, the same students from last year's freshman class that did not accumulate enough credits. And so what we will see if we do our work the way we want to, and you'll see in our presentation today next, that's a real core area of focus for our schools team as we try to improve our freshman academies. We made it one of our top district priorities as a Tier 3 PDSA, is those numbers will even out. And you would start to see 22 or 2,300 in a freshman class, and because you'd have less students essentially repeating their freshman year in terms of credits earned. So I want to be clear that this is not a demographic shift. It is the consequence of a high failure rate in the freshman year, which then contributes to a low graduation rate during the senior year. We recover some of those students along the way. Our graduation rate is slightly higher than our freshman on track rate. It gets a little closer to 70%, particularly when we get up to 5 years. We start through Roosevelt and other interventions to find some of those students and win them back. But at the end of the day, that doubling, not doubling, but a substantial increase in the size of freshmen is not due to a bunch of students joining our district. It's because we have them repeat a chunk of their freshman year, essentially, in terms of the credits they've accumulated. Not something we're proud of, something we definitely have to improve.
I guess my long-term point, though, is I'd like to see us plan for success and plan for increasing our graduation rate. And if we do, I think what we're being told is that we could have a capacity issue. So we should be just thinking about how we would address that if we were successful. Are there any other questions on this topic? If not, let's move on to the next topic, which is the academic return on investment for the freshman academy. We've talked about doing these AROI analyses. And so this is the administration's sort of explanation of how they intend to do the AROI analysis on the freshman academy, which is what we had talked about doing, this being one of the targets for sort of the more in-depth AROI analysis for this year. So if you look through the slide deck, you'll see there's a plan, design, analysis, evaluate, and act. So the first is the planning is selecting the target, which is the freshman academy. And the second is define success. And so what they're proposing is to define success by both freshmen on track and student engagement. So there's 2 success factors there. They're saying that they're going to define success as the percentage of district-wide freshman students who are on track to graduate in the 2021 school year will increase as 10% as compared to the 18-19 school year, which is what they're using as their baseline. So the 18-19 actual was 65%, and their goal for this year is 75%. Student engagement, they've got a 6-question survey that will be administered twice annually, and they'll actually use the 2021 to establish the baseline. The next slide on student engagement is at least 50% of students will show an improvement in engagement from fall to spring. Subsequent years, they haven't defined the target yet, but some percentage of students will show an improvement in engagement from fall to spring. And the next step is to identify a comparison group. We really, because all of the high schools have freshman academies, there's not really a control group. So they're just going to use an internal standard year-to-year freshman class comparison. In the design analysis, where they're going to look at collecting data on attendance, discipline, engagement, GPA, and remote versus in-person learning. They'll collect the outcomes data, the implementation of key components. One, which is on slide 10, small learning communities, emphasis on action items. 2, implementation of key components, freshman seminar class, 10-year plan and pathway changes. 3, implementation of key components, involvement in community, partnership with Alignment Rockford. And then the map the cost is to consider only costs above and beyond the cost to have a regular freshman class. So whatever the additional investment is for the freshman academy. They list startup costs for this on slide 14. They're showing a total startup cost of $171,902, annual costs of $168,222. And then, let's see here. So after they do the creation of the study design and evaluation, they'll pause, they'll do an ongoing data analysis and program improvements. The action steps in support is the creation of data tracking systems to inform the study. Freshman on track widget. Somebody's going to have to explain to me what a widget is. To support effective small learning communities. Actually, I've heard the term enough, but I've never bothered to learn what it actually means. Ongoing partnership with Alignment Rockford, partnership with National Equity Project, standing by weekly meetings with academy principals. Try to figure out, so the next is the evaluation part of it. Evaluate the program effectiveness, analysis of the cost effectiveness. That's really what AROI is really all about. And then try to draw some insight. And the last one is act, share findings, make decisions, timetable for work. So that very fast, high-level summary with questions.
I was just curious, Mr. Rollins, if is there a wide do we know if there's any variance between the high schools as to their success with freshmen on track? Or we know what the number is for the district, but I'm just curious as maybe that one of our high schools is doing a whole lot better than maybe there's something to learn there. That's why I'm bringing that. I don't know if anyone knows the answer to that.
Not me.
Okay.
I think Dr. Vosberg would have a pretty good idea.
Okay.
I think Guilford's a little bit higher, but they're all in the same range in the mid-60s.
Okay.
There's not a big variance to say this school has affected the model.
Okay. All right. Good. Mr. Siegel.
Is there any concern about having a consistent measurement from the 2018-2019 school year and the 2020-21 school year, given that there is nothing similar about this year versus that previous year?
We are deeply concerned about that. But that does not mean our work can be paused. We have a whole group of freshmen that we need to do what we can to keep on track. But we feel it's going to be important that, while this is very much an aspirational target, this is something that we think is the right work to do. And Dr. Vosberg and the academic ROI team and the Ed Services team have worked very closely with our freshman principals to encourage a stretch target, but to understand that this will be a difficult measurement year for virtually all academic measurements, including the freshman on track rate.
Thank you, and I agree. This is going to be a very important initiative to stay on top of. Thanks.
Mr. Connor?
Similar to what Mr. Siegel just said, but from my view, a stretch goal is good in kind of normal times, and I know we can't leave people behind, so I'm really torn on this one. I just, to me, if you could do the 65% number, I think you'd be doing really well to keep it where it was. So that would be my only comment on this, is that I think it's commendable to have people stretch, but I think if people respond to that, the most likely outcome is we'll keep it the same, and that should be celebrated because this is a particularly hard time.
Okay, if there's no other questions about this, we'll move on to the last and definitely not least topic, school performance framework. So this is setting out a framework for really what the administration plan. Whoops, I am wrong. For how the administration plans to work with schools, evaluate schools, work with schools, and set up a sort of a timeline for improving their performance. So we've talked about a sense of urgency to improve our schools. The framework is a structure to accomplish the work. The framework brings together quality, compliance, and continuous improvement with tools in each category to measure our progress. Our accountability department is overseeing the system-wide framework. Brooke Peterson, who leads that department, is available to answer any questions. I would ask that you just open up that PowerPoint and we can just walk through it. And I don't know if you've all taken the time to look at it, but there's really three things that they're looking at. They're looking at quality, compliance, and continuous improvement. And so the quality piece of it is going to be based on these quality peer reviews that the administration has been working on revamping. And I don't know, it might be worth, I mean, these things are all worth talking about, so it might be worth somebody discussing, giving us an overview of what the revamped quality peer review is going to look like.
I believe we have Mrs. Peterson available remotely, so I'm sure she would be happy to guide us through any portion of the slide deck.
Would you like me to go through the slides, or would you just like me to speak to certain parts?
Well, let's just right now, the question is, what does the revamped quality peer review look like?
I'm actually going to defer to Heidi Detman on that one if possible, because she's been more involved on the QPR revamp, whereas I'm more involved in the other aspects.
Sure. I'm happy to speak to that. So essentially, we have taken our quality peer review framework and we have gathered kind of a cross-departmental central office team to look at what went well with that framework in the past, what some deltas were, what needed to be revised. And then we took that feedback and kind of flipped the quality peer review to move from teacher-facing actions into student-centered language. And so what we learned in our Plus Delta activity is that there were too many indicators, there were too many pieces of the rubric, and oftentimes a school would have a really meaningful review and in the short term find a lot of value in the data, and then because we didn't have a quick enough turnaround and it wasn't tied directly to a larger system-wide framework, it kind of phased out into the background. So our goal in the revision is to make it abbreviated with a narrower focus, focused on student-centered language, narrowing the number of rubrics, and then tying it into this overall system so that it's a support component and a lead indicator for schools within the entire system for accountability.
Is the process still mostly the same, as in you take people from within the district, people from other schools in the district, and that's who's doing the quality peer review?
At this point, yes, we intend to build on the success that we've had in the past of that. We're trying to use this year, though, to look at not just in person, but also some virtual options. We recognize now, of course, that we have to be pretty nimble and be able to adjust depending on our circumstances. But yes, overall, the goal is to have teachers learning from teachers and providing each other feedback as another form of professional learning for groups of teachers and administrators.
Okay, thanks. So that's one piece of it, is one of the three pieces is the quality, which will be done through the quality peer review. The second piece is continuous improvement, which is the school report card. And we've seen a first iteration of the school report card. We had some discussions about that. My understanding is the administration has been working on revamping the scorecard. And I don't know whether somebody can give us any sort of a timeline on when the board would be able to see that.
I would like to basically be bringing that forward at future meetings this month as follow-up, because this is a report. I think it would be appropriate for us to continue to, it would be hard to limit this conversation as in-depth as it is. I've committed to this being, pending the board's approval, one of my CEO-centric targets. One of the things I want to personally agree to the board to spend time on. Obviously, I'm not doing this work without a ton of help, but the idea would be to have a regular conversation with the board throughout the year, and I certainly want to front load that conversation this month, because what I don't want to do is get way down the road with something like the school scorecard without making the proper changes that the board would like to see on the front end. I think we will have to recognize that there will probably be two conversations around the school scorecard. One being, what can we measure this year and last year in a pandemic, and what do we want to measure outside of last year and this year moving forward in terms of improving that scorecard. So I can have a draft to the board as early as the next meeting to have a more in-depth conversation because I think this is going to be an extremely important part of the work because this ultimately determines that we have a common definition of what success looks like for schools. And I think all three of these components are going to be important, and I know the scorecard is the one that has been the most visible thus far, and I would be happy to bring that forward as early as next meeting. Mr. Lowry from our accountability team made substantial improvements based on board feedback last year, and then the pandemic hit and we never really had a chance to have that conversation. You'll recall we had months and months and months of conversations about how our schools were performing last year, and that gave us a really rich opportunity to get feedback from the board about what was working and wasn't working with our previous scorecard. And I would love to start that conversation again as early as next meeting.
And then the third leg on the triad is compliance, which the administration is coming up with a set of standards of practice and standards of service. And if you look on slide, I think it's 8, there's no number on it, but the previous one is 7. So standards of service are central office responsibilities, and standards of practice are a set of standards for principals and teacher responsibilities. And then, so the administration is going to take all three of these, and if you get down to, I think it's slide 13, no, maybe it's 12, slide 12, what their plan is to take these three sort of accountability pieces and then assign schools to a 3-year track, a 4-year track, or a 5-year track based upon where they scored on these three accountability measures. And for the consequences of that are that for a 3-year track school, all district supports are required. For a 4-year track, all district supports, still says all are required. And then for a 5-year track, district supports are all available but are not required. And there's a little more than definition of the timelines in the following slides. In slide 13, in a 3-year school, the district provides supports for low-scoring items on standards of practice checklist. In year 2, the district reviews the data annually and shifts required supports as needed. And then there's a question there in red, which is a good question that I think we ought to be talking about. So we put these schools on a track. Do we just then watch them for 3 years, even if they continue to go downhill? So what are we going to do? Do we say, okay, you've got 3 years and it's hands off? Do we get to intervene before the end of the 3 years? Same thing at a 4-year school, which is on the next slide. And then a 5-year school, same thing. The district supports aren't required, but then, the question is, well, what happens if something changes during the 5 years and it starts going back down? So from just a very high level, what they're talking about doing is using this year to really finalize all this and train people and be ready to implement it all beginning next school year. So from a timeline standpoint, what that means is not that I don't think we can go any faster than that, but you would be putting a school on what is essentially an improvement plan, a 3-year improvement plan starting next year. And it'll be on that improvement plan for 3 years. So that's a very high level. There's other slides in here that you can look at and ask questions about, but that's a very high level explanation of what the administration proposes to do for the school performance framework.
And again, I would just add that this work, as covered in a very high-level overview in this slide deck, is one of the 3 major work streams I'm requesting as a focus area for my CEO-centric targets this year. I think this is important work, and obviously I won't do that work alone, but I want to engage the board in that work as early as possible, assuming that it's something that the board wants the district to focus on, and as well as for me to personally focus my time there.
Does anybody have any questions or discuss it?
I had one. I'm assuming this would include our charter schools as well.
That's one of the things we're really excited about, is this is going to very much mirror what our district schools and our charter schools will have a very similar protocol. We're ahead of that as expected. The reason our charter schools got a dose of that higher level of accountability and feedback is because they've had more autonomy. And this is very much about a conversation about higher performance gains autonomy, and when schools are struggling, we're giving additional support. But there is autonomy that is given up. Charter schools get the ultimate amount of autonomy, but they also have a much higher stakes accountability system to start with. Okay. And frankly, we didn't do a great job with that trade-off in the past. So we really had a reset with some very intense board renewal conversations over the last 2 years with all 3 charter partners. I think we will continue to see that this can be, with our district schools as well as our charters, an opportunity to have very clear feedback. One of the big changes you're going to see here, Mr. Rollins pointed out, there are 3 ways we are looking at how schools are performing. It isn't just the scorecard. There is also going to be the quality peer review, as well as the standards of service and practice, which allow for a 2-way feedback loop between the district office and the schools in terms of compliance as well. So I think this is going to be a much more holistic look at how a school is performing. I think the risk of a scorecard only analysis in terms of determining 3 or 4 or 5 years is we have portions of our, this is also about giving credit to schools that are doing things the right way when some lagging indicators like test scores haven't moved yet, but not moving so far away from those test scores that there isn't real accountability for a lack of improvement in student achievement. And the board is going to be instrumental in setting up what this accountability system looks like. We are going to be very heavily involved in recommending to you how the system should be designed and how it should work, but then at the end of the day, this is going to be the board system to hold all of the schools in our district accountable, but also to support all of our schools in a great 2-way conversation between the community and our schools.
Mr. Connor.
Well, this is a lot, obviously. I think I think this is the mental equivalent to sticker shock. So if you look The one example I see is if you look at slide 11, and there's no numbers on the slides, so you have to go into the upper left and look. It says standards of service. And so one quick question on that is you have the one highlighted. I assume it's everything that you're just showing an example there? Yeah. Okay. So it looks very much to me, and I tried to read through them even though it was very light print. And for old people, thank you very much, not the easiest, is that it looks like that the standards of practice are going to affect what's done here in a sense, right? So am I correct on that assumption?
Right, so standards of practice are about our schools doing the required work correctly, and standards of service are how well is the district office supporting the schools. So there's a two-way measurement here. One is how is the central office supporting schools, and the other is of the things that are compliance oriented, and we're really going to try to highlight the most important. How well is the school doing at addressing those? And I don't want to jump in and answer all the questions. Anything that you would like to add, Mrs. Peterson or Mrs. Detman?
I would like to just take a step back on the compliance end of this and just state that we're the furthest behind as far as this goes. This is the least evolved. This is very conceptual at this point. So slides 10 and 11 are completely illustrative of what we're envisioning this to be, and they are high level at this point. But basically, what the concept of the compliance framework would be is simply that there's this back and forth, a determination between all of us at the district level, with taking into account input from our focus groups that we've assigned and that we've determined at this point. What are the high leverage items that we think are going to move us in the right direction? From the school perspective, and then how do we support that at the district perspective? So this is an illustration of the practice at the building and then the actual correlated support that the central office would provide.
That explanation makes sense to me. I think I recommend that the communication of this be clear that that's driven by that, because the history of this district is a lot of things that were seen as top-down, whether they were or not. And clearly, that's when I read it, I assumed, actually, that it was more driven from the front, and that's certainly the way it sounds. So I think that would help to understand that, if I understood what Mrs. Peterson was saying correctly, that this list, this description of these services really come out of the support for what has been requested, and it sounds like there's focus groups. So to make that clear, I think would be really important, especially as you roll this out.
I guess I do want to interject a comment. So this isn't going to come as a surprise to anyone because I've said similar things in the past. At the end of the day, our accountability is to the community and to people who are thinking about whether they want to enroll their kids in the school, whether they want to come to Rockford. And it may be grossly unfair to use only lagging indicators, but the reality is that's what people are looking at. When they're making decisions, they're looking at lagging indicators. And my overall concern, and I'll be watching for this, and I hope the rest of the board will as well, I don't want to create a system that makes us look better than everybody else thinks we are. And so at the end of the day, people are going to be looking at our lagging indicators. They're going to be looking at our test scores. They're going to be looking at our graduation rate. Those are really the two lagging indicators that people look at. There are all kinds of websites out there now, rating schools, for people who are thinking about moving someplace. That's what they look at. They look at all those lagging indicators. So it's important to make sure that we have the right leading indicators and that we provide the supports. But I really, really don't want to see us do something that tells a school it's doing a really good job when the lagging indicators would indicate otherwise. So when all of this comes together, I mean, that is what I'm going to be looking for.
You have some consent items you're going to talk about? All right, okay. What's to come in October, probably?
So the following items will be presented on the consent agenda for the October 13th, 2020 board meeting. Number 1, Tier 1 PDSA, UCCM Cisco phone system upgrade support, which are upgrades to ensure reliability. And then number 2, Tier 1 PDSA, units of study writing videos to support remote learning for kindergarten through 5, K through 5. Are there any questions or discussions on these consent items? And then there are no items to be presented on the consent agenda for the October 27th, 2020 board meeting at this time. And this completes the report of the Planning and Development Committee.
Great job. Last but not least is our internal external stakeholders standing committee, and that is chaired by Mr. Siegel with liaison of Mr. Dotson Jr.
Thank you. As a courtesy and appreciation of board support and input, the communications team, led by the illustrious and inimitable Earl Dotson Jr., it's all extemporaneous, I assure you. They wanted to give the board the very first look at the new website. This will also be the first time the cabinet has seen it. The communications team will also be sharing with other groups before the launch to make sure that everything is working the way that they need it to work and is providing all the appropriate functions. And Monica Bain, the district's web manager, will now give us a brief tour and highlight some of the new features of our new website. Thank you.
Hello, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So welcome to our new district website homepage. So right now you can see there's a video that's automatically playing. This is called our hero video. And when we go to the school sites, you're also going to see a hero video. So let's just take a tour of what you'll see. So first we'll see our vision. And right now we have these 3 buttons: enroll, careers, and health. We're not going to change these buttons much, but they will change once in a while. Next, we have our 205 Vibes section. So we'll put our latest blog post, our featured blog post here, our podcast, latest news item that we would like to feature, and then here's the video that you can play right off the homepage. Next, we have our upcoming events. And if you want to view the full calendar, you can just click right here. And this part is our testimonial section. So right now, this testimonial is featured on the careers site as well. This is a teacher from RISA. And we have a principal quoted here from the Meet the Principal page on the Johnson website. And then we have a graduate. He also used to be an SSAC student who wrote a couple blog posts for the Vibe. So we pulled one of his quotes there and featured it in this section. Again, this section will change as we see fit. And then down here we have our by the numbers section where we're featuring some key numbers, spoken languages, amount of pathways. And these numbers will also be on each school homepage. And then here's our footer, standard footer. The buttons in the footer will match what we see on the page. So if we go to the top, let's first go to a school website. So I'm going to go to Whitehead Elementary School. And when you're on Whitehead's homepage, you're going to see that hero video again. So right now you're seeing some drone footage that Connor went ahead and took of all the schools. There are some schools that he was able to get video of kids in the classroom, and this was before March, where he started going out to schools. So later, when it's safe again, you'll see this video replaced with a video of kids. So as you see, this looks very similar to the homepage, and that is on purpose. It'll just be easier to navigate if we're familiar with the look and feel. So we have the dates, the calendar, and then this is our Meet the Principal section. So every school homepage, you'll have a nice picture of the principal and either something about them or letter to families. And they can read more by clicking this button right here, Read More. And then there's the Connect with Us section. So we'll see the latest blog post that a staff member from that school wrote, or if there's not a blog post to feature, this is a blog post to encourage bloggers to write. It can be alum, teachers, students, just to encourage that anybody can write about the great things happening in their school. So now we have the Facebook that automatically feeds in here. If a school has a Twitter or Facebook account, they are welcome to feature it on their homepage. So Whitehead's Twitter account is actually connected on their homepage. And here we'll have the latest video that feeds in automatically from YouTube. And then this district by the number section looks just like the homepage, except the colors match the school's colors. So it's customized in that sense. And if you look at the footer, the left side has school information and the right side matches the district footer. That includes the buttons here. So I just want to show you, I'm going to minimize my screen here. So this will be the experience of a mobile user. As you can see, this right here, this is called the hamburger menu. And when you're on mobile, that is how you will navigate. So you can go back to the district. Here's our translation button. And we have 50 languages available here. And we can add more. Navigate to different schools. And then, for example, if we click About, well, let's go to that Meet the Principal page I was talking about. And this is what they'll see, that nice photo of the principal and then the bio. So I want to navigate back to the district site, the home page, and we'll walk through a couple more sections. So up here we have the parents and community drop downs, which is just a bit different than how we have it organized currently. So when we started meeting with each department about their department page, we asked them, well, who's your primary audience? If your content is for the public, it will go on the public website, but are you trying to reach parents, or is it more of a community thing? So under parents, for example, we have athletics, we have the calendar, language and cultural services, meals. I'm going to highlight the registration page and show you that, because currently we do not have a registration page. We've relied on news items and we've communicated other ways, but I like this page a lot because there's FAQs here. So if you're really not sure, because as parents we have lots of questions and they're all valid questions, we can maybe start here to get that little bit of guidance for us. And then under community, I'll show you the facility rentals page. And again, this is a nice overview of what can I rent, what are the rates, and some nice steps. And 5 steps, how do I rent a facility? Well, first, is the facility available? And if it is, then you can go ahead and move on to step 2. Just an overview of that and some contact information. And then next, so as you see, we have the 205 vibe about RPS 205, Board of Education and Careers here, a couple more. You can also access those via the hamburger menu, just to highlight that. Staff will click Staff to access the staff portal. Translation button, let's say we want to try that out. Let's go to Espanol. So it will translate words on the page. It will not translate PDFs or anything like that. So as you can see, Las Escuelas Públicas at Rockford, it automatically translated it, no issues. So let's go back to English. Okay, here's our search right here. So first, let's go to About RPS 205. It's a nice photo of Rockford. And then here we have some links: school zone locator, district report card. We have our mission, vision, and values, and some really nice graphics here that Kate put together. Thanks, Kate. I know she's listening in. So let's go to the About the Superintendent page. You can see some text about what we're focusing on. We have a link to the Vibe, the Supers Update section. We have the feed embedded on the page. And over here we have community columns. So these are those columns that are featured in The Voice. We can also access them on this page. So the facilities master plan page. So this is just an overview of what has been done and what's left to be completed. And this page will change, of course, in the future. Here's the FOIA public information section. And here's where you can find all that FOIA information, how to submit a FOIA request, and how to access those requests that are posted in board docs. And then if you click View District Reports, here's where you're going to find all those reports. So bargaining agreements are here, salary and benefits. Here are your financial reports, and then contracts over $25K. So now we're going to check out the school scorecard page. And this mimics what we have on our website right now because the information is still fresh and relevant. So you can click here to view the dashboard. Here's that video explaining why we have it, what it is. And then we have our FAQ section. And it's nicely set up where it's not overwhelming. You could focus on one question and answer at once. And then as far as what's measured and the points assigned to it, you can easily navigate that here. So state of the district. This page will change once a year, and that's based on the state of the district speech given, I guess this year it's going to be in November. So we'll update it that way. So here's that brochure that was given out last year. We can click and view. Here are some slides. And breaks down the student experiences. Again, this will mimic the focus of each year's state of the district. And then we have our strategic plan page. So as you can see, the goals are here and the strategies. So next, let's go to Board of Education. So here's a quick link to watch the board meetings, to go to board docs, Laura's contact information. So if we go to the About the Board page, that's where all your contact information will live. So we have this map right here, find your sub-district. You can click on it, and if you're not sure who your board member is, you can get an idea. I'll click on it here quickly here. And then the sub-district map and the legal description will be under each board member's name. And then here's our meeting announcements and minutes page. So we can kind of just scroll over here and get a quick view of the upcoming meetings. And you can click here to view the full calendar in grid format. And then the meeting minutes will be housed right here on that same page where the meeting announcements are. So this page mimics that request to speak at a committee of the whole meeting form that we have built in Let's Talk. This link right here takes you directly to YouTube, so I'm not going to click that right now. This link, the Board Docs link, takes us directly to Board Docs. And then we have our Governing Policies page. And what I like most about this page is that the policies are all on one page, whereas before we had to divide them up on separate pages, but this is great. It's all in one place, and it's easy to navigate. And then lastly, let's check out careers. So one of the goals of our site was to better recruit people to work here. So we worked closely with the recruitment department to plan out what this page would look like. So we're also excited about it. So right here, this is the teacher from RISA we saw on our homepage. And here's his quote featured. And then we have 3 buttons: teach, lead, and support. We'll click on those in a bit. Then when we have career fairs again and it's safe again, all those events will appear in this section. But for now, we're okay with saying there are no events to display. This career interest form, this will be a good tool when recruitment is out at events and they want to catch people while they're interested. So potential applicants are able to quickly send in their resume so that recruitment can reach out and have that conversation and hopefully encourage them to apply. Then we have some fast facts about our district. Then we have HR hours, and because this site is career focused, right here we just have the recruitment department's information. So let's click on one of these buttons. Let's say I want to teach. So here's some introductory text to really pull the web visitor in and encourage them that, hey, you want to work here, and here's why. That's what that does. And then join our team in 4 easy steps. You'll see this same section on the lead and support page. And then teaching positions. So let's say I want to teach early childhood. I can click here and get taken directly to AppleTrack. I want to teach elementary school. So click here and you're taken directly to those elementary school teaching openings. So let's just quickly browse the lead and support pages so you can see how they're laid out in a very similar fashion. And now let's go to the support page. I want to note that this is a great photo, but we will swap it out down the road. Thank you, Connor. So if we scroll down here, we have these same sections, how to apply. And then here are the support positions. And these buttons will change depending on the categories that are created in AppleTrack. So if the categories change here, we will be updating the buttons on the teach, lead, and support pages to match. So let's go to benefits. Just gives an overview. As you can see, this says sample icon because we are still, finishing up and getting ready for launch on the 30th. So this gives you an overview of what to expect. And we can click here and we're taken to that benefit summary packet. And then here's our Life in Rockford page. Couple more things. Here's our cost of living calculator. It takes you to NerdWallet. Overview of Family Fun, Downtown, and Rockford Eats. And here's a link to Go Rockford. So if people don't know anything about Rockford, they can really explore what there is here and maybe encourage them to apply. And on the growth page, lastly, last thing I'm going to show here, this just gives a high-level view of how you can grow once you work here. And with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. That was a great tour of the new website. Are there any questions or comments from board members?
Mr. Connor.
Are they going to have coupons for coffee for pages like the strategic plan,
Yeah, okay.
the board policies,
Yeah.
about the Board of Ed? Just suggesting,
Yeah, okay.
coffee, or if you have sound in
Chocolate.
these, something like Metallica or something, to
Okay.
keep people awake.
Very creative. We're always open to feedback, so I appreciate that.
Monica, I had one question for you. You know, one of the first slides you showed, there was a button that had said health as one of the tabs you could click on. What's under that?
Yes.
Is that like the policies of immunizations and things like that or whatever?
Let me share my screen again.
Okay.
So in non-COVID-19 times, that button will lead to volunteer. But for now, we put health on there because if families are coming here, they can access immunization information, but more importantly, the COVID-19 information.
Okay.
I just didn't want to put COVID-19 right there on the home page because I think we're all thinking about it enough.
Right. Okay, very good, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody else? Okay. Great job.
Thank you. Moving right along. Next section is about something called the Speakers Bureau. The responsibility of public relations has been conducted primarily by Dr. Jarrett and the aforementioned peerless Earl Dotson Jr. We're at the point where this work and responsibility needs to be shared. This concept came about several years ago with the idea that various individuals would take a condensed version of Dr. Jarrett's annual Chamber of Commerce address and speak to various community groups, repeating the same high-level ideas as the superintendent had given, with just one voice. The school district went out and spoke to internal and external audiences when we were asking the public's permission to build 2 new schools, which I'm aware several of the board members here participated in those conversations. The questions that we need to ask ourselves and the conversation I would like to engage board members in would be, who do we want to speak with or listen to? What do we want to discuss? And what do we want to know from them? And what information do we want to share? Where do we want these discussions to take place? Meeting people where they are. In a present COVID-19 world, how do we want to engage them? In a post-COVID-19 world, how do we want to engage them? With limited time, when should these conversations take place? And when should we start? I threw a lot of questions at you, and I guess I'd like to go through them and actually have a discussion about this. I don't want to stay here all night, but I do think that we should start talking about who we want to talk to and what our message wants to be, or what our message should be.
Well, I guess I'll start because I've done some of that and been asked to do some of that. Dr. Vosberg asked me to speak to the Cosmo Club. Dr. Jarrett and I spoke to the Chamber of Commerce just recently at their government committee meeting or whatever. So Okay, thank you. So to me, certainly one of our audiences ought to be the business community that, as represented by either club or organizations or the Chamber of Commerce. I guess that would be some suggestions that I thought. But also, I've had opportunities to speak to neighborhood community groups. I've spoken at the Northwest Community Center, that kind of thing, and they just want updates kind of stuff. And I think I talked to them mostly about the facilities plan was what they wanted to hear most about. But so that those kind of community neighborhood association groups would be one. Those are two suggestions I would have. Anyone else? They're thinking.
While they're thinking, if I could briefly just add a comment, I do think one of the things that Earl Dotson Jr. and I have done in our work, and I think board members have all been engaged in this from time to time. So often a speakers bureau's work is not about delivering a message, but it's about actively engaging and listening. I have often, as I've spent more time in this work over the years, I've increasingly understood that we will be at our best as we do this work collectively together if there's a lot of listening connected to any speaking that goes on. I think that's going to be important with any group that we connect with.
We have held breakfast meetings that Earl coordinated for our legislators in the past to give updates to our legislators and listen to their issues. That would be another group, our legislators.
Mr. Khan. Yeah, I don't have a comprehensive list or anything, but I think definitely when you said the business community, I think there are certain birds of a feathers group, like the real estate organization and things like that, some of the professionals, which may or may not be business as such. And I think that we want to get the message out to a lot of those folks. But as Dr. Jarrett said, equally important would be listening. And so I think that there's actually quite a few of those, and I assume, but I don't know, that groups like Kiwanis or whatever might be similar. I think the one thing that we want to do is at least keep our eye open for groups that we don't normally reach out to. I don't know when the last time we, say, presented to Kiwanis or whatever, but I think it would be important to go and make sure that community, groups that are active in the community are exposed to what RPS is all about. So that would be one of my suggestions, is to specifically look for a lot of those groups and see if there are some gaps in what we've done.
A couple of ideas that had crossed my mind. We're actually working with or talking with groups that are already really close to us, like the REA, not for bargaining purposes or anything like that, but we do have some shared interests that we can work together on. For instance, we struggle to find enough teachers, and I think they would always like to have a robust membership. Are there ways that we can work with them for recruiting? And can they be helpful to us and we to them in recruiting diversity? These sort of things. I don't know if, talking to groups that we have a regular relationship with, but maybe talking about some different ideas would be a worthwhile thing. I'll I'll take that as agreement.
Yeah, we're nodding.
All right, so there isn't any particular action item attached to this. I kind of feel like we've realized there's not going to be a lot of discussion on this, but it is something that's going to come back. Again, if you happen to have ideas on either groups or topics, things that we need to hear from the community, please let me know. Please email me, and I will come back again in a month, and the same topic is going to reappear. Moving on to the last item is our lobbyist, and Mr. Scrivano mentioned that we have done some of our own lobbying in the past. We have used legislative breakfasts that I think worked well once upon a time, and from what I have heard from administration and from other board members who did that work. But for various reasons, those breakfasts sort of stopped. We do have a lobbyist that we pay, McGuire Woods. Our contact is Michael Cassidy. And I think we have all in our one-on-ones with the superintendent at various times been able to weigh in on things that we would like to have discussed with McGuire Woods, is that they can lobby on our behalf with Springfield. But one of the things that has kind of been frustrating to me is we haven't really had a lot of time for robust conversation as a board about the legislative issues we would like discussed. And yet every year we have a little bit of a discussion of renewing the contract. We always do it, but I think this would be a great subject for us to discuss, not only to bring legislative ideas to light, but also when it comes time to discuss this contract, we can sense of whether we're getting our value or not. And my sense is that we have, by and large, but kind of like the Speakers Bureau, what are some topics that you would like to bring up with our lobbyist?
You're looking for those now, okay?
Yeah, and there's obviously going to be some.
Funding.
What's that?
Funding.
Okay,
That
so
would certainly be at the top of the list. Okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
evidence-based funding will be kind of a given
okay.
for any kind of funding, whether it's facilities, evidence-based, of course. But are there other issues that we need to bring up with our legislators? Mr. Connor?
I'm not sure how to articulate this one, but I'll use as my example that early childhood is very dependent upon really grants, and it seems to me that working with the state around early childhood, and the having more steady funding, more reliable funding would be a topic that, virtually everybody I talk to, whether it's in the community, administration, teachers, the board, all point to early childhood as so important. So I would say definitely that would be a topic, and consistent funding. And I think the other thing is that I think the lobbyists here have done a good job, but their ears have certainly been open to the notion of looking for unfunded mandates, and how are these things that are being proposed going to look when you execute them? When you actually implement, the cost can be a whole lot more. But I certainly think that as an ongoing topic, giving feedback, again, unfunded mandates, whatever it is, that there is a lot of costs that the legislators I think don't know about. So that would be something that I would like to see them put at the top of their list.
Mr. Rollins?
Well, Mr. Connor already used the phrase that I was going to use, but I'll also say I'm a cynic. We're just spitting in the wind. I mean, legislators cannot resist unfunded mandates, and it doesn't matter what our lobbyists do. We're just going to get the unfunded mandates because they just can't help themselves. I'd put it on the administration at one point during the last discussion I had with the lobbyists. Outside of funding, what is there that we think is a barrier to student achievement? What can they either, what laws are we subject to now that are actually hurting us and making progress? Or can we come up with anything that we would like to propose that we think would make it easier for us to get students to learn?
I'm not sure that the terminology I'm using is correct, but using the use of public school funds for private school vouchers would be, I'm not sure if that's really called a voucher, but basically what it is. Topic.
One of the topics that I would like to see addressed would be the amount of required testing. What exactly are they going to expect? And I think this year is going to be an opportunity for not only school districts, but our legislators to take a really hard look at what's necessary in testing. I think that there is a certain sense of test fatigue that I have heard from teachers, from parents. And this might be an opportunity, now that people are kind of reimagining what education looks like, to bring up that topic. I don't know if that has any interest. There seems to be a lot of enthusiasm for unfunded mandates and that sort of thing, vouchers.
Just that if board members have other thoughts
Yep.
that come after this, they can contact you to add to that list.
Correct. And like the Speakers Bureau, this subject is going to come back again. And if there are board members who would like to schedule a trip down to Springfield with our lobbyists, we are told that is one of the great influences, is actually having board members show up with the lobbyists. Adds just a lot of reality to what the legislators are going to hear. So if you are interested in doing that, please let the administration know.
Okay.
I do not have any action items to report on. I'm just going to keep pestering you with these things.
Very good. Okay. Okay. I just give a 2-minute update on the governance committee. The consent items for October 13th board meeting and the 27th are the same. There'll be the meeting minutes from the previous meetings, contract purchase orders, and the Freedom of Information log, and those will be all consent items. As we move along with this standing committee format, the governance committee has other things that they have to work on. Mrs. Holdley will keep us to task, I'm sure, because she is my liaison for that, but including things like the superintendent's evaluation, guidelines for committee activities, guidelines for communication between board and the superintendent, things like that we will be working on. So we do not have any speakers for tonight, so is there any other business or agenda items for tonight? Mr. Connor.
Are we going to have board comments as part of this? You didn't say it specifically, but So we have time for speakers, and usually at our regular meetings, we
Okay.
have board comments.
It isn't on here, but would you like to give a board comment?
I would, actually.
Okay, I will let you do that.
Thank you for asking.
Okay. Okay. Okay.
Yeah. Well, first of all, let me just say, on a personal note, we lost one of our guitar gods today.
Yep. Eddie. Okay. Yeah, it sounds like a keyboard to me. Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
you feel really old, trust me, when, you know, all the guitarists or whatever are dying.
I know.
So, anyway,
Okay.
just thought I'd say something about Eddie Van Halen.
Okay. Okay, any other comments from any other board members? Yeah, okay, that's right. All right, yeah, there you go. If there are no other comments or agenda items from the board, I'll take a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
It's moved by Mr. Connor, second by Mr. Siegel. All those are in favor say aye. Opposed, same sign. We are adjourned at 7:21.